This is the Amp Hour Podcast, released July 17th, 2025. Episode 698. Hardware Security with Matt Brown. Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Chris Gamble of Contextual Electronics.
And I'm Matt Brown of Brown Fine Security and the Matt Brown YouTube channel.
Hey Matt, welcome to the show.
It's great to be on the show and to just have a chat about the cool world of IoT and IoT security.
Yeah. Making and breaking. Let's get into it. So I've been following your channel for a while now, and just like I love how you're digging into stuff. One of your recent series around like your IoT smoker. I think that's great because it's like we keep buying these off the shelf products, and we think like, what the hell is going on under the hood? And you're actually looking under the hood. So maybe we could just start there. What are you trying to do when you are reverse engineering, when you're digging into it, when you're trying to decompile firmware, things like that?
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, with the charcoal smoker video, it's like you can't buy some of these classes of devices, home appliances now, without it having Bluetooth or Wi-Fi enabled and integrated into the device. So sometimes I make strategic home purchasing decisions around, it would be fun to reverse engineer this thing. But when I look at one of those devices, I kind of look at it like I'm trying to get inside of the head of whoever designed it, right? The team that designed and built that system. And the first thing I want to do is figure out how it works. There's parts of, like I don't know if we're going to be able to define the word hacking. There's different definitions of that word, but kind of the original definition of, hardware hacking and things like that is to take something apart, to understand how it works, and then maybe to make it do something that it wasn't intended to do. And those things that are unintended may or may not be security vulnerabilities. And so I really love taking something apart, seeing, does this run Linux? Is this a microcontroller? And then digging in, and then always asking, hey, can I get the firmware off of this? Can I reverse engineer it? And just slowly, piece by piece, I can start to unravel how does this system tick? How does it work?
The manufacturers, I don't know about you, but I am a cheapskate. I will buy the bottom of the barrel. And like you said, you basically don't have a choice. So now it's like, okay, I'm buying from, the bottom of the barrel. It still has this stuff in there. There's some kind of cloud component to it. And like, I don't know if I trust, some of the high end vendors to do this stuff. Like Jeff Geerling had that thing about the Bosch Wi-Fi dishwasher thing. And it's just like, I don't trust the big companies, let alone the no-name small companies. And then I'm probably buying it straight out of China. That's fine. I'm okay with that. But now the stuff is transiting back to China or some random AWS instance, as you show in this video. It's just like, I don't know who's making this stuff, right? It matters even more than it used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's kind of funny, you mentioned Jeff Gerling's video. I saw his video, and then I also was in the market for a dishwasher. And through a complete coincidence, I happened to go to Home Depot and buy like the same family of dishwasher. So maybe there'll be a video in the future about me taking apart my dishwasher if my household can withstand that. When the charcoal smoker is down and out, then it's like, okay, that's mostly like a me problem. But if the dishwasher, that could grind the whole household to a halt.
Right. I guess you always have the manual method for both smoking and dishwashing, but the latter actually could take up a significant portion of every day. And I think it would be, if you take it apart, you gotta rectify the situation by hand washing those dishes.
Exactly. I actually had to use my charcoal smoker yesterday, and I was like, oh yeah, right. I need to put the computer module back inside of it in order for this thing to work. But yeah, you made a really good point about how now, all the way, up and down kind of the product space, everybody is integrating, some form of IoT, some sort of, they want their device to be a smart device because they think that that's going to get an edge in the marketplace or something like that. I do think that there's a market out there for dumb devices.
Oh,
Like
100%.
I think people like me would love a TV that's not a smart TV. That's just a TV, right? I think now you kind of have to. I was actually like looking at this the other day, and it's very hard if you're looking in the consumer space. I think if you look at in the commercial space, like TVs that would go in like a business, like an office space, those you can find like dumb TVs and stuff like that. But it's really hard in the kind of normal consumer market to find that device.
I think that's a good point, actually, and I think that actually drives some of the it's really about like money, right? It's like okay, so we have to sell into the same market that's, now we're trying to price match at the bottom of the range. How do we do it? How do we still make our margins? It's like, oh well, this TV is now ad supported, this Amazon Kindle is now ad supported. Oh, they control that category. But just consumer expectations, the, people sorting by lowest price first, Chris saying he's the cheapskate, right? All of these things, and then it's like, I don't know if I would pay a premium though. I don't know. Are you willing to do that for like dumb devices?
Yeah, the TV is one I'm really starting to starting to think about, but in other cases, no. Like, it's 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 usually a non-factor, right? Like I want a dishwasher that washes my dishes well, and whether or
Mm.
not
Yeah.
it
Yes.
has,
Right.
this smart capability. The same thing with my oven. My oven is I got a new oven, and then a few weeks later, I saw that there was like a new SSID when I was like scanning around,
Oh
and
wow.
and I'm like, "Oh, there's just an access point. There's just an open AP that's broadcasting on this like Samsung device. It's probably for the initial setup process. A lot of times
Right.
it'll
Right.
open up a little Wi-Fi AP, and that's how you hand it over the credentials to your network so it can connect."
I've always, I used to work at a cellular MVNO, and I was convinced this was now 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, but I was like convinced that device makers were going to try and like improve the consumer experience and put like a cheap cell module in there just for initial configuration. And then like, just thinking about like my parents are getting older, they probably don't even know their Wi-Fi password, sort of thing. It's just like, just get it set up, get it booted up. Maybe you don't keep cranking data, but you give it like 50 megabytes of data for setup and troubleshooting, and then that modem is just completely dormant. And I have not seen that. Maybe you've seen it as you start cracking stuff open.
I've definitely seen some cell enabled devices, but they're usually for the full life cycle of the device. It's not like a just for the setup process and then that goes dormant. Um, yeah, I know that cars nowadays, it's like hard to get a car that doesn't have, a 4G modem. And even if you're not paying for the 4G hotspot inside of the car, the question is like, okay, well, are they sending diagnostic data back, over that link or something like that? Yeah, it's interesting, but you're right, and especially with uh, yeah, like I also, will go home and help parents out with technology related things, and
Yeah.
uh,
As nerds, it is our birthright.
it is. It's like every Thanksgiving and Christmas on the holidays, right? You just know that you're like, all right, gotta gotta get ready to clean some viruses off of computers and
Yeah,
do
yeah, yeah.
help out set up a printer or something like that.
Yeah, actually, my sister's boyfriend took on the we're gonna migrate my parents to one password, and I was like, oh, like just a password manager more, and I'm just like, oh, thank God. Like,
Because then they can like
he's
share
doing
it.
the
They can
Lord's work.
share it with you, right? And yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
that's
Yeah.
excellent.
Oh, I just meant like then he's got to answer the questions. Like he's doing the right thing. It's really great of him.
Nice.
Uh,
You're outsourcing.
but
You're
that
out. You're
initial setup,
outsourcing
yeah,
the
exactly.
tech
He's my
support.
IT group at the local with the locals. Yeah.
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 No, but you're right. There's no standards like with all this
Yeah.
IoT stuff, right? It's almost like
Mhm.
now we're talking about AI slop. It's like there's a lot of slop in the IoT world as well,
Yeah. It's
all over the
yeah, yeah,
place.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about kind of digging under the hood on that smoker specifically. One thing that I was really interested in, I'd love to talk about like just bringing it back to best practices as well, because I work for an IoT company. I've learned a lot of things like that, things that people do well, things that people do poorly. But like one thing that stood out to me in that Smoker video was they had the private keys stored in Flash. Is that right?
Yeah, that is.
That's
Oh,
it. Just seems like that's like the number one no no, right? That's like keys to the kingdom right there in Flash.
yeah, and to some degree, I think it always comes down to what is the threat model. That's a question us security people always like to go out and ask the universe. Well, what's your threat model? Uh, so with a charcoal smoker, uh, is it like one of the most security critical devices? Maybe, maybe not. Right. Um, but you're right in terms of like a general best practice. The question is, where are you going to store those keys, right? And so in that system, it was an ESP32 was the main chip that's driving the smoker. And now I believe there is you can do in the ESP32. I was learning a lot about ESP32 hacking on this project, and so I believe it is an option in their SDK to encrypt Flash, which was not the case, right? This Flash was all unencrypted. And so, yeah, the private keys were stored in there. But what to me was one of the even more alarming things from a life cycle, from the kind of device life cycle process, is those keys were not rotated when I would like add the grill and then remove it and then add it to another account, right? So
Yeah,
so
right.
you even have some kind of so it was clear that those keys just stayed in there across a factory reset, and then that
Yeah.
device ID was kind of always locked to the set of in this case it was doing mutual TLS authentication with the AWS server. So it's a key and a certificate pair that is kind of
Mhm.
tied to the identity of the serial number of the grill.
Okay. Well, let's define some terms too for former hardware dummies like myself. How about that? I'll just Chris 5 years
Yeah.
ago, 10 years ago. So in this case, so a certificate, a key, private key, public key, those sort of things. Like what are these things, and how would people normally be using them?
Absolutely. So whenever you hear the words private key, public key, and or certificate, you can mostly think of those as interchangeable, those terms certificate and private key or public key, sorry. But we can they're not exactly the same, but we can think of them in that category as they're two it's a two-way uh well, let me back up. So asymmetric encryption is where you encrypt something with one key, you can decrypt it with the other key. And so that with that private and public key, anything that is encrypted with the private key can be decrypted by the public key, and vice versa. And so the way that is used on this grill is there is an authentication scheme in TLS where a client can authenticate themselves. They can prove that they are who they say they are by uh, basically answering a challenge, basically encrypting some piece of data with their private key. And then the server side, having the corresponding public key, can decrypt it. And if they find the expected value, that effectively proves that the client that sent them that data, that they possess the private key. And that's how
Yeah.
authentication is performed in this case.
And then symmetric versus asymmetric. So symmetric is both sides have the same private key. Is that right?
Yeah, so symmetric key encryption is sometimes called shared key encryption, where yeah, the
Mm.
same key is used to encrypt as well as decrypt the data. And so um
So that's more like a username password type of thing, then
yeah,
almost.
yeah, almost. It's yeah, exactly, where both sides know the same piece of secret information. And then
Mm.
you always have the question of well, how do you safely distribute those symmetric keys to each side?
Right.
So
Yeah.
the
Right.
the
It's a slip of paper, I believe, right? You write it down, put on a sticky note right next to the smoker.
exactly, exactly, exactly.
So okay, so then and then just to go back to threat model real quick as well. So you said the threat model for this one probably wasn't that bad, I think you said. But is it like kind of what is accessible if you do get a hold of that key? Is that the threat model
Yeah, the threat
in
model
that
is
case?
like, what type of attacks do you consider that you're trying to defend against? I guess is kind of like what a threat model is, right? So I always like to illustrate with this with like a couple examples. So um, one is I'm gonna give two polar extremes of kind of like theoretical situations, and I think this always helps with the threat model question. So one, let's say there's a camera, like an IoT camera, and it's like inside of a house and it's situated in a place where it's going to see whoever approaches that camera, and let's say it's really good and it sends like an image of the person up to the cloud really fast, right? And let's say there's a vulnerability where if you get physical access to this device, you can you can do something to completely take over the device. But first, I need to get physical access to the device, right? Um, it could be possible that the manufacturer of that camera would be like, yeah, but that's not in our threat model, right? Because
I
the
see.
thing that you're trying could be.
Because we loaded it up with C4 and it blows up if anyone touches it.
Yeah, yeah,
Boom.
right. Another version that I tell it that's maybe a better illustration is, to say like, oh, maybe there's a vulnerability where if you have physical access, you can make it so that the camera can't communicate with its cloud server in the back end. And I always say, well, yeah, I can do that with a baseball bat too, right? So at that point, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
maybe we don't care about that physical access threat
Mm.
in that case and situation. The polar opposite, the polar opposite example is a crypto wallet. A crypto wallet, the one thing that it's supposed to do is that if someone else gets possession to that wallet and they don't have the pin code or some kind of credentials to be able to decrypt your private keys on there, which effectively are storing all of your cryptocurrency, if an attacker can obtain your cryptographic private keys by having physical access to that device, the whole game is up, right?
Mm.
The threat the device's threat model has been completely defeated. And so I always like to talk about those two polar extremes because there's some times where we care about physical access attacks, and there's some cases where you're like, okay, yeah, let's try to make it as hard as we can, but maybe it doesn't matter as much. So the grill, I would put it in
Okay.
this kind of medium position because a grill is usually stored outside, right? And so
Okay.
that's usually stored outside your house, and so it's maybe a little more feasible that somebody could just come and like rip the computer module out of your grill. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
but but also maybe you're like, as long as you can't remotely attack the device, then someone might consider it secure.
I mean, I would think about getting your Wi-Fi credentials. I mean, Wi-Fi is not the most secure, but generally pretty secure. So you could get Wi-Fi credentials off of it. It seemed you seem like you did that very easily. I'm going to say you in all these cases. I don't know if I could do this. And yeah, other than that, yeah, then your AWS keys as well. But then what data other than like your meat smoking patterns? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I'm gonna leak,
Yeah.
my secret temperature that I smoke ribs at or
Right.
something
Right.
like that, right? Yeah.
Right. Right. But then to put in a different spin on that, it's like you might not say the same thing about an HVAC because then you could truly have like how often the system's on. You can correlate with like basically being home or something like that, right? There are certain correlations you can make with pieces of data that could make that data more valuable that you might not have otherwise.
100%. Yeah, yeah. People have done studies on, your power usage. There's all sorts, yeah, these sort of side channels to knowing if you're home or not, or if you're away on vacation,
Yeah.
right? There are
Right.
some there are some threats that could exist there for sure.
Okay, so then in this case, if this was a $5,000 smoker controller, the controller that's running the smoker, what would be the best case scenario? What would be the most secure way that they should be doing this stuff?
Yeah, so kind of what I would say is the top level of security there is that there would, one, be secure boot that would prevent modified firmware to be loaded onto the device. And the other thing that secure boot or well, okay, so like secure boot, arm trust so there's like arm trust zone, or there are external sources of security, like a TPM or some kind of a security module that is able to store cryptographic keys, and those cryptographic keys could then be used as like a secure way to encrypt the flash storage. Um, because I believe on the ESP32, most ESP32s, they're it's like it's inside of a shield, right? But underneath the shield of that little ESP32 module, there is actually an external, like a discrete
Yeah. Flash.
flash
Yeah.
chip. And so
Yeah. Yep.
even if you like disable all the debugging capabilities of the device, you can still open that up,
Right.
desolder that
Right.
flash
Key
chip off.
pencil and you're in,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. I've done that by accident a lot of times actually.
Right, right. And so you can pull that off, and you can put that into a flash reader, and you can read the contents off. But
Mm.
if you have a different place other than that flash chip that your encryption credentials are stored, that are encrypting the contents of the flash, then uh, then you're basically requiring that an attacker have like a 0-day. So here I'm kind of thinking in more of a Linux system context, because that's actually more of my expertise. But it, you're requiring them to have some greater exploit to be able to gain access to the running system to be able to extract those keys. And so that that makes it a lot harder to be able to get the decrypted content. In this case, that would protect, your Wi-Fi credentials and the AWS keys as well on the device.
I have a piece of hardware that I've designed, and this has a ATEC 608, and I've had that on multiple devices in the past. And that, to me, is like it is a it's a pain in the ass if I'm being honest.
Yeah,
But it is like so like and one thing I never understood about it either is like it's I squared C part, right? I'm like, but you could just like look at the traffic going much like that spy flash, right? Like you just look at the traffic, but I didn't quite understand kind of like how it all works. But it was kind of you explained it before, where the server sends a challenge, the private key is stored, you generate it in the chip, it never ever leaves that chip, and then you're just doing things like you're adding the challenge into that, it spits the challenge back out. You're adding in a CSR, or sorry, what is it like you trigger a CSR request, certificate signing request, and you send that to the server, and then you get certificates back down. It's just like all this back and forth that was very non-intuitive to me at first, and it's very apparent why people don't do it. It is it is a pain in the ass, like.
that's right.
But
Yeah,
if they were,
I've actually worked with those chips a few times, and I played around with a development board for one for a while.
okay,
I never ended
yeah,
up doing a video on that, but that would be a fun rabbit hole to go down again. And
yeah,
you are
yeah,
correct that at least by default on those chips, uh, whether it's like a CPU or like an MCU that's communicating with that secure element, uh, usually those, I squared C or whatever protocol it's communicating with,
sure, yeah.
you
UART
can
doesn't matter,
hook
right?
up a logic analyzer and you can see all the communications. And there are a couple ways that you can add security to that. One, like you said, is using it the correct way, where most of them in the SDKs, the private key is like it's like write only. Like
Yes.
an attacker could overwrite. They could like they could like they could always like
Erase it from all
yeah,
existence.
yeah, yeah. They could do that, and that
Yeah.
is sometimes an attack vector, right? And another way you could
Interesting.
think
Oh,
about it
wow.
is that I could just pull that chip off the board and put my
Yes.
secure element on there, and
Mhm.
there is a way to encrypt the digital signals that are going over those I squared C lines. Um, and to effectively have some encryption and authentication, right? And then you
Sure.
basically have to put some kind of a hard coded a shared key, it's doing symmetric encryption here in this case, between your firmware on your MCU or on your Linux system or whatever, and then on the secure element, and that will affect you. And then what will happen is the MCU is basically authenticating, like, hey, am I communicating with the right secure element and not an attacker's secure element
Mm.
that they placed into there.
And that's sort of like the root of trust stuff. We've had root of trust people on here talking in the past as well. Like, how do you even know that the secure element's secure, right?
Ooh,
That's like the
yeah.
getting all the way to the bottom.
Yeah, and that's a little bit beyond my pay grade, but I know there's all sorts of services out there where, uh, yeah, you can basically, send them your keys, and they'll ship you a bunch of secure elements with them, burned in there. And there are
Mm.
there are verification processes that you can put it through
Oh,
to make
interesting.
sure that they're
Yeah.
legit and that they haven't been tampered with.
Yeah, I think the other thing that confused me a little bit about all this stuff is that like public keys are okay to like. So now you and I are like working on a project together, and we have a shared server, and I want to put my public key for SSH access, right? Like you could see my public key, the server can have that public key. It doesn't really matter that the public key's out there. It's just the ability to then rewind and put a new one later, right? That's kind of the main idea there.
Yeah, so that's a great analogy. Is that in the SSH key context, right? You can post your public key on your website. You can give it out to the whole world, and there's not a security problem with that. The security problem is if somebody that shouldn't trust a public key takes it and puts it and uses it in a trusted way. And I actually do this in some videos on my channel, where a device will reach out to a server, and like if you go into your web browser and you type in google.com and you hit enter. Well, what your web browser is doing is Google sends you its certificate, and then it's signed by there's a root of trust, right? It's signed by a authority that your web browser or your operating system trusts, and then it verifies that chain of trust. And so, uh, but if someone were to trust, an untrustworthy CA, or in the case of the SSH key, if somebody were to just trust an attacker's public key, then the system that uses that effectively uses that for authentication, right? Because then the SSH client is going to perform authentication because they have the private key, and then they could get into that server if that key was trusted on the server. And in a similar way, if I do this with IoT devices where I want to see inside of the TLS traffic that's going over the network. And I actually did this in the last grill video, where I did firmware modification, and I replaced the CA certificate, that root of trust inside of the grill's firmware, with my own, that I have the corresponding private key to, which means
Right.
I was able to forge a certificate for whatever the AWS
I'm AWS
IoT
now.
IoT
I'm Azure now. Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
and then
Yeah.
you can use that and put that in an intercepting proxy program, and then I can intercept and see inside of that TLS traffic. In this case, it was using MQTT, or if it's traditional HTTPS, then it would be HTTP inside of that tunnel.
Yeah, that's great. I think I really liked how you were showing Wireshark too. I mean, just like Wireshark is a kind of high level tool, people hear it, but then it's like it just look. I mean, honestly, it just looks like gobbledygook until you actually start applying keys and looking at the different layers. And like, there's such a rich ecosystem of just like stacks on stacks on stacks. Like, yeah, I'd used it for like open thread stuff in the past, and just all the different layers all the way down. And then at the end, it's like, no, you need to decrypt this. Then you do it, and it's fine. There's the data. It's great.
Yeah, it's an excellent tool. That's actually the first when I was in high school, I got my first ever like cybersecurity or computer book, and it was a book on
Mhm.
Wireshark. And
Oh,
and
cool.
that's actually like what was my like first step into this world of
Got it.
networking and devices and things like that. So yeah, I've been
Yeah.
using it for a while.
When you mentioned you came from the Linux space, so then like from your perspective and kind of moving from Linux down into smaller and smaller devices, how I guess are you still chasing kind of the Linux kind of hacking type of things as well and vulnerabilities in that space, or is it more focusing in the IoT microcontroller space because that's maybe has more interest for you?
I'm definitely interested in both, but there are some challenges in the hardware hacking of microcontrollers space that I've been trying to push myself into because it is hard. And the hardest thing is with a Linux device, there's always extra the flash, the storage is always external. And so there's always some way to read it out, right? I mean, I have a collection of a bunch of different kind of firmware readers, but as long as I obtain the correct type of firmware reader, I will be able to read that firmware. Now, sometimes some of it is encrypted. We talked about that. That is difficult and all, but at least I can get the stored flash content on a Linux-based device because it's external to the CPU. But in the microcontroller world, sometimes microcontrollers have external flash, and then you're like, yes, it's easy. I just get to
Yeah.
do the same thing I do on a Linux based device. But when there's internal flash on the microcontroller, and then you're like, okay, did they leave the debugging on? That's the first thing, and you're like,
That's a
you're
helpful one.
crossing your fingers. And for a while, my skill set was if they disable debugging, then I'm not going to get the firmware, right? If there's
Got it.
not
Got it.
external flash, or if they if they don't lock out the debugging, then I'm not going to get the firmware, and that's where
Mm.
fault injection comes into play to attacks against certain microcontrollers and certain microcontroller
Mm.
families to glitch the device into a state that will divulge that firmware.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
I've
That's
just been starting to learn more about.
in both these cases, then so you have the firmware just to stick in the Linux space for a second. So you
Mhm.
so you you're able to dump these. You get a full file system dump. Say it's unencrypted. Like, do you still have to decompile at that point, or is it more like just a file system read and you can start to see what's like because maybe there's scripting or something in there?
It really depends on the device, but most of the time it's gonna involve binary reverse engineering in Ghidra, in IDA Pro, something like that, right?
Okay.
So most of the time you'll dump the firmware, and it's just you just get one blob of data from that firmware dump. And then it's going to involve usually using something like binwalk to try to automatically extract file systems and things like that out. um, Sometimes if I do have a basic kind of UART terminal connection to that Linux device, most of the time Linux on boot, in the boot up logs, it'll print out the partition table, and kind of all
Mm,
the offsets, right? And so
that's
you
nice.
can then
Yeah.
use that and kind of use the DD program to carefully carve out each of the file systems from that image that you've dumped. And then you can and sometimes binwalk, the automatic firmware extraction, will fail, and sometimes you kind of have to go to this more manual route. But then once you get a file system, once you have like a folder structure that has, you always get that little dopamine rush when it unpacks correctly and you see like Etsy, user
Yeah.
var,
Ops.
you
Yeah.
see the
Yeah.
all the telltale signs of your root
Give me a bin. Give me a bin.
your
Give me a
root
bin.
file system. Exactly, exactly. And then it's like, okay, where are the binaries on the system? And of course, it's probably going to have, busybox and all of your typical Linux commands. And those are the things you don't really care about. You want the custom software, right? That runs the web server or something like that. And so usually I've seen a couple IoT devices that run like Python. You mentioned like, can you just get scripts and things like that? And there will be bash, there'll definitely will be bash scripts that will perform, device initialization and things like that. And some devices use more bash than others, but usually you get to a point where there's a binary, and that's the binary that runs the web service or whatever other service on the device. And then you need to load that binary into some reverse engineering tool to start to decompile it and to look for the stuff you're interested in.
Yeah, and so, like, just to tie it back to your video, so, like, you have, what, a couple of security cameras and some are security cameras usually Linux-based? Is that a fair
I
assessment?
would say 99% of the time. I've seen a couple of them that are lower power. It I guess the rule of thumb is if it's battery powered, it's
Mm,
50-50. There's
yeah.
some battery powered Linux devices, but most of the
How
time,
big a battery we talking here, right?
yeah, yeah, right, right. There's some pretty
Car
cool ones
battery.
out there
Okay.
that will like sit in a low power state, and then there'll be
Mhm.
some MCU powered uh like
Yeah.
motion
Image
detection,
algorithm or
motion
TF
detection,
light.
or an AI algorithm, and then it'll
Yeah,
flip to the Linux side after that. But
yeah.
for the most part, it's going to be one or the other, and most cameras are just Linux based.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I mean, just the data throughput and stuff like that, it would probably be well, we talked before the show, like, I think some of the newer parts are definitely getting into that space, like, I was talking about NXP's, kinda mid-range stuff, but they still it's the it's still kinda messy in that messy middle, you know?
It
Yeah.
is, and there are. I think the way to do it is that there is a lot of custom silicon out there that you see especially in the video space. And so, if you were going to do a microcontroller, you would probably have a very specialized chip that had video encoding capabilities, uh, where you didn't have to like run it in your kind of general code, that where there was special silicon or even an external kind of component on the board that would handle that encoding. And that's probably how you would end up being able to pull that off on a microcontroller based device.
Okay, so then best practices, Linux devices, microcontroller devices, seems like still encrypting flash, that seems like a good plan.
Yeah.
Turning off debugging, it sounds things that make Matt mad are probably good things for product decisions. Don't expose JTAG, hide your UARTs.
Exactly, exactly. And there are starting to be some regulations that are coming, definitely out of Europe, that I think are gonna push device manufacturers, even the unwilling ones, in that direction.
Is that like CRA,
Yeah,
Cyber Regulation
CRA,
Act?
and it's like the EU Red is like the governing body. I I
Okay.
I feign ignorance a little bit on it, but I've observed it from afar, the things that are going on
Yeah.
there.
It's like, well, I mean, it's like, you gotta pay attention because otherwise it's gonna smack you upside the head at some point and be like, oh, yeah, we should have been looking out for that one. Yeah,
Yep.
like especially as a product maker, I feel like is probably they would probably push much more than someone doing the vulnerability testing. But
Yeah.
then at the end of the checklist is probably like, and CRA, like, are you paying attention to that?
Yep.
Better be. Just across the devices that you look at, are you seeing stuff go one direction or another? Is there more Linux stuff? Is there more microcontroller stuff? I mean, micros are getting more capable, but maybe that doesn't mean maybe it's still just product decisions and constraints.
Yeah, I think like that battery powered thing. That's just
Okay.
that's just my gut of what I've seen in terms of devices that I've taken apart over on my workbench, is that there are a ton of cool new devices that communicate, that are either like Bluetooth or Bluetooth only. I think a lot of times, and this is obviously not strictly the case, but a lot of the times, if it has Wi-Fi, then it's more likely to be a Linux device. But if it's just Bluetooth or Zigbee or Z-Wave, some of these short range, or even medium to long range RF
Yeah.
communicating
Laura type
devices.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, LoRa. Those are oftentimes microcontroller based devices, again because they just want it to kind of sip power and be powered off of a battery. And so I think that's where the market is kind of segmenting. But on the other side, there's this demand for AI on the edge that I think has a big play, right? Because AI and ML on these devices, it used to be that data got shipped off to some backend server with a bunch of GPUs in it, and then it would do all that. And maybe you'd get your security notification. It'd be 5 or 10 seconds after the event happened. Well, people don't want that. They want stuff to happen quick, right? And so everybody's trying to put their AI stuff on the edge, on these embedded devices. And so I think there's some devices where that might be the reason why they're still running like a heavier Linux based system, because they're like, well, it's already consuming a bunch of power, or they need those compute cycles to do all this, to support these features that the market is demanding.
The power envelope thing is a good as a astute observation for sure. Do you find, I'm not sure how you're judging kind of the quote unquote value of these things to you as a security researcher, but are Linux based devices more likely to have like vulnerabilities that are again quote unquote worth more to people like you?
I think so, because they are typically, or I think Wi-Fi is the bit. Once it has like an IP address, right, and it's a Linux based device, there's oftentimes just a bigger attack surface. Because if I can attack something over the network, if we think about there's this risk scoring system, the CVSS, and I do not know what that acronym stands for, but it's kind of the de facto standard for risk scoring a security vulnerability. And the first thing that you fill out in the little calculator is the attack vector. And I believe the categories, if I can, there's remote. Can you exploit this remotely over the internet? And then that's going to obviously impact the risk score the most, right? If it's a remote attack. And then there is local. Okay, so okay, I have to be on like a local network. I can't do it over the internet, but maybe I'm on the same subnet as the other device. Okay, that's the next highest level of risk. And then you have adjacent, which is a lot of times where us IoT security researchers live, and that's like, can I exploit it over a radio, some kind of RF based
Got
protocol,
it.
Bluetooth,
Yeah.
Wi-Fi, kind of all falls into that category. And then the last one is physical. I have to physically get my hands on the device in order to uh, perform the attack in question. And so I think Linux based devices, just because people use all of the plethora of open source tools and the SDKs and the defaults that are
Yeah.
available,
Yeah.
that's why I feel like there's higher risk vulns that sit on those systems, because they tend to be, more often remotely or locally exploitable instead of adjacent and
Yeah.
physical.
I always think about like the fish tank that was like, turned into a botnet or something like that, right? Like
Or the
it had
refrigerator.
remote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Silicon Valley
Yeah.
style, like yeah. Yeah, I think just something that could be used to zombie it to do something useful for the person who has the vulnerability in hand. Aside from just the account access and there's the data access, I guess, image access in the case of a camera. So like for example with the smoker, if someone did have access to that somehow remotely, would they be able to then use that to hop onto your network and maybe get to another device? Is that ever a possibility?
That's sometimes a possibility, and I think it's just way more feasible on a Linux-based device, because on a microcontroller, it's always a question of like, well, how do I get remote code execution on one of those systems? There's just the path to that kind of access is usually pretty difficult. But if we set that aside, yes, if you could remotely execute code on the ESP32 that's on my smoker, well, that smoker, when it's functioning and when it's not malfunctioning, uh, and when it disconnects from my Wi-Fi network all the time, but if it's properly connected to your Wi-Fi network, then yes, they could hop onto that network and then start attacking other devices. But
Got it.
yeah, you made a really good
So
point
remote
though.
code is like the ultimate. That's like the ultimate prize to be won
That
is
that
remote
that
code
is remote
execution.
code execution is, yeah, it is the holy grail. It's on that scoring system that I mentioned. That is
Mhm.
always going to kind of land you into the critical category of a vulnerability, which uh, I mean, that means a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people. Like we were talking about before the show, I do a little bit of bug bounty, and so that typically translates in the bug bounty world into dollars, right? It's you're going
Yeah,
to get
right,
paid
exactly.
more for
Yeah.
that vulnerability, but
Hmm.
yeah, because that usually means that you have full control over the device. You can do effectively whatever you want to do on that device. Now, sometimes. Uh, you might get code execution, but you might be running as a lower privileged user. But a
Hmm.
lot of the Linux IoT devices out there, everything runs as root, and so
That's right. Yeah.
I have this running joke with everyone in the IoT world. A privilege escalation isn't really that big of a deal because once you get code execution, you don't need to elevate your privileges from some lower privilege user up to root. You're just already root. So
Well, what about in the you had mentioned kind of Bluetooth access, remote access over RF, and you had a really great video about the SDR stuff. But I'm kind of just curious about Bluetooth specifically because I'm doing more of it these days. Like, what are the things you see in that space that are good, bad, ugly?
yeah, so Bluetooth, especially Bluetooth Low Energy, is there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong with that. Bluetooth Low Energy is obviously it's way more user friendly. Uh, Built into the protocol is the ability to enumerate all of the services that a device has on offer, and so there is an app that is called NRF Connect that you can download on iOS
No.
or Android, and you can just
Yeah.
scan and you can see all of the Bluetooth Low Energy devices around you that are broadcasting constantly and are advertising the services that they offer. And so and then usually you can just happily connect to those devices and you can start and then the services all have these properties which are more or less like permissions, and so they're like things like read or write or notify, which is effectively like it's like a pub sub type of a situation there. And so you can enumerate all these services, and then you can start trying to read or write. Now maybe there will be some kind of protections in place. Oftentimes, what you'll see is that device manufacturers that have some existing type of serial protocol that they've already designed, some binary protocol, they'll effectively implement that over Bluetooth Low Energy. Uh, there's no property, there's no way in Bluetooth Low Energy natively to do asynchronous communications, but you can effectively achieve it by using that notify service to receive data back from the device and the write service to send data to the device. And so oftentimes what I will find is I will basically get to a point where I'm reversing some custom binary protocol over Bluetooth
Mm.
in order to see if a device is vulnerable or not. Because basically, I'll, on my phone or using a Bluetooth sniffer, I'll, get some packets that are going back and forth between two Bluetooth devices, and then that's effectively what you see is you see a bunch of writes and you see a bunch of notifies on, and you're like, okay, this is some kind of a binary protocol back and forth
Got
between
it.
the client and the server, and then you need to figure out how that works, and can I then connect to the device and send the same messages and
I
and
see.
and and affect the device in some bad way.
Yeah, that's it. It is interesting, like to kind of visualize it as like if you just had an RX-TX line going out like
Yep.
to a device 100 feet away. It's like, oh, it's like that, except it's way easier to listen in than like putting a current clamp around those wires. It's
Right.
like, oh yeah, all right. And then I mean, what are some of the things that you're able to do? So I'm looking at of course your videos. It looks like you have a scales are so you're able to get like scale readings or make it
Yeah. So
setting.
on the scale, I ended up reverse engineering the Android app. So most of the time,
Ah,
for all of these IoT devices, the client is a mobile phone, right? Because with most of
mhm.
these devices, there's some app that they have you download, and then it connects to the device over Bluetooth. And so with that scale, I found that, you go a million layers deep, and there was some hard coded key, some hard coded symmetric key that is
Aha.
effectively being used as the authentication mechanism. and it was hard coded into the
Uh,
Android app, right? So it's not unique per uh, device and client relationship,
got it.
right? So then
Like anyone buys any scale, it's always the same password, basically. Password.
exactly.
Yeah,
And
we
so I found
appreciate that.
that on the scale, so the scale had this feature that you could hop onto the scale. It, let's say you left your phone in the other room and or it was turned off or something. You could step on the scale and it would take your readings and then you step off. And the scale actually kind of has this you add your profile to it, and the scale would actually know who you are based on like,
Oh,
you know, all the properties and the readings that it was taking. And so it would store that data locally on the scale until
oh
the
no.
phone would come by later and sync and pull the data off of the scale. So what I found I was able to do is I was able to extract the data off of the scale
Wow.
that was being stored. Uh, Again, authenticating with those hard coded credentials and performing a very esoteric encryption, custom. It was a bunch of security through obscurity, where
Right.
using that hard coded key, doing some really obscure encryption, and then you send the write, and then again it was one of these write and notify in the Bluetooth space, and you just have to send the right message, and then it will send back a message that meant you authenticated correctly, and then after that I could send the requests to retrieve the data off the
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, so there definitely security by obscurity, like that is very common. It feels like in a lot of like, anything with an RF, they're like, oh, who would possibly? And it's like, well, Matt would do it, uh, among others, right? I mean, like, yeah. And then I've talked about this on the show before. I'm just flabbergasted at some of the things that are just like, well, nobody cares about this data. So
Mm.
like my toothbrush has Bluetooth, and then like to hook it into Home Assistant, it was literally like, I see a toothbrush. You want to claim this toothbrush? I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess that's my toothbrush. And then it was like, Chris is brushing his teeth at 10:33 p.m. and is like, so Chris is home right now. Like this is broadcasting the world, and it was across my house. Just like,
Wow.
what the hell, man?
Yeah.
It's the Oral B, by the way, if you want to check that one out.
Ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually for like a private client, I have tested not
uh,
not not that device, but I have tested a
uh,
smart toothbrush before. They're a fascinating product line. Yeah, I do not own a
and I
smart
think
toothbrush. I own a lot of theher smart devices, but not a
I
toothbrush.
just wanted an electric toothbrush. You can't buy them without this anymore. Like literally, I have to like. I think it's just maybe here's the business we start, Matt.
Yeah.
Is Faraday cages for anything. Like phone covers, but it's like
Yes.
that same thing. You just make Faraday cages in every shape and size, and you just really get good at Faraday
Or
cages.
something that like you it's like a mold that you form around your device, and then it stays in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
form
yeah, yeah.
factor. Yeah, I like
I
this.
like it. There's probably a business in there somewhere, or like Faraday cages are us. I guess. I think in that specific scenario, it's like it doesn't seem like that valuable of data, but there is probably something there. Maybe not valuable enough to have a bug bounty on it or whatever. But I don't know, man.
Yeah, and what I always tell people who kind of make that kind of argument of like, "Oh, I don't have anything to hide," or "I'm not concerned about this data," it's that there's probably somebody out there, a journalist, a dignitary, right? Like there are people, and this gets back to that question of threat model. So devices can have threat models, and then people can have threat models. And so some people have different levels of threats with different amounts of resources to
Mm.
go after you. So it might not matter for like, average Joe, but it might matter for somebody who's a little bit more important or has people out there
High
that
high
want to do
value
them wrong.
targets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what about other things that you use in your everyday? I mean, so you mentioned Ghidra, you'd mentioned I have these written down somewhere here. Ghidra, IDA, Pro, something else, but like those are software tools, right?
The-
What about like hardware tools, other things that you find that are useful? Like what's in your toolkit that people listening might want to emulate?
yeah. So one that I have here is my XGeku firmware reader. This is like probably the best price to value firmware reader that's out there on the market, and it's a Chinese device, and it's got okay Windows software for it. That's it's a little finicky sometimes. I definitely run it on a burner laptop. I would suggest
Yeah.
that everybody do that, and that's
Uh-huh.
isolated and doesn't have any of my other data on it. But it is like you just can't argue with the amount of chips, right? Because with these firmware readers, there are some that will sell you the reader for a big chunk of change, and then they will nickel and dime you for every little
Oh,
reader. So this is a kind of
it's like a plug-in
a
system, huh?
generic interface, and then there are all types of sockets to fit the million different packages of flash chips that are out there in the world. And so
Yeah.
this tool really is my go-to, and it's by far the best. There are some chips that it can't read, and that's why I have a whole collection of other readers. But the
Mhm.
XGECU, this is the T76. There's the T56 and the older like T48. But they're all really solid firmware readers.
Well, then you mentioned, side channel type stuff, so you're using stuff for doing side channel attacks and stuff as well?
So okay, so I have not yet gotten into side channel attacks
Oh,
yet.
okay.
I've been doing some voltage glitching, and for that I actually have and I've been doing also lately I've been exploring a little bit more. So there's voltage glitching, and then there's also like electromagnetic like
Mm.
there's like, kind of like where you're sending like an EMP pulse effectively to the
Yeah, yeah.
device. And so for that, I have the Pico EMP, and then I also have I forget the name of the voltage glitcher that I have,
Mhm.
and yeah, I can give you that, and we can put it in the show
Okay,
notes.
that's no problem.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about other ones like, Chip Whisperer on the past,
yeah,
just like one example that's like that, so yeah.
yes,
Okay, cool. It seems like probes are a big one for you. It looks like you had the same ones that the
yeah.
bulky
So the
probes with
PC byte probes, those are
PC byte,
huge,
yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I've had a number of different logic analyzers. I do have a Saley logic analyzer
Yeah.
now. That's kind of like the big brand name one, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you can't argue with the quality. They do make really good equipment. There's obviously cheaper options out there that are knockoffs, and I've used those before, and most of the time they work okay. But the Saley equipment is just very high quality, and I really like that stuff. So
What about other software thing? I mean, I guess SDR is kind of just a recent example that you've been doing more SDR stuff as well, so that was a
yeah,
really interesting one.
yeah. So I recently acquired a USRP. The Edis brand, or the model number is the B200. I have the NI version, but it's effectively a B200 software defined radio. And I've been doing some fun messing around with a dog shock collar, and I've also been trying to demodulate and sniff LoRa as well, just as a fun
Mm.
exercise with
Yeah,
that. But
yeah.
using GNU radio, trying to teach myself to make my own GNU radio graphs, which is definitely a learning
Mhm.
curve. But I've got some
Yes.
I've got some good contacts that in the kind of RF space that are helping me out with that, which I am very
Yeah.
thankful for.
Yeah, GNU Radio, the first time I was using it, I think it was with an SDR as well, just like a simple like one of the little dongle ones, and, I just remember being like I had no idea what I was doing with, like, just the installation process had me running for the hills, so it, but yeah, then you can do a ton with it, and you can really try a lot of stuff, all the different, modulation methods and things like that, so that's
Yeah, and then the other software-defined radio tool that I've gotten a lot of value out is Universal Radio Hacker, and that allows you to, record signals, and then it's got some basic demodulation capabilities. So, in my recent video, it was able to demodulate the FSK modulation that the
Oh.
dog shot collar had, and then I was able to
Oh.
actually get ones and zeros, and actually decode the packet structure that was being communicated over the air. And the cool thing is I could actually validate that I was demodulating and decoding everything correctly, because the dog shot color had like a value of like, 1
Yeah,
through
yeah.
12, that I could set the little buzz it does shock, but then there's also like a vibrate method if you don't want to shock your dog, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, I was watching that, and that's the exact same receiver as the ones that are the invisible fence. It's like they
oh
just make
yeah.
the same kind, and then it's like a handheld or the invisible fence, and then it's that sort of thing. So
Right, right. But it was really cool because I'm new to all of this RF stuff, that I was able to confirm that I was not crazy, and that I was doing the demodulation correctly, because I was actually able to see, as I changed my transmitter level, I could see the number that I was decoding in a certain spot in the binary protocol, that I could actually see that number incrementing by 1, and that was just like, it's really fulfilling when you're learning something new, especially in the reverse engineering world, when you have like multiple unknown variables that you're trying to kind of account for at the same time, and then you get something right, it kind of confirms your suspicions all the way in
yeah,
reverse that you kind of built upon. So that was cool.
yeah, it's like finding the corner piece on a puzzle, huh?
Exactly, exactly.
I'd love to just dig into that real quick. I do not have the stick to itiveness that it sounds like you definitely have, and it seems like it's like part and parcel of the security industry. Like the ability to just like look at the same packet over and over again and find these decoding tools and stuff like it. Do you have any tips for impatient person like me, a child of the internet, as it were?
Ooh.
How do you like? It sounds like you get dopamine hits from the finding it, so that sounds good. But what
I
drove that?
do.
I
I
guess.
do. And so what's really funny about it for me is, since I've started making YouTube videos, I think,
Hmm.
and this is personally something about myself probably, is that I learn a lot and I push myself when I want to teach others something. So one of the cool things about my YouTube channel is, sometimes I'll make a video about something that I'm brand new to. Now, there are some of the topics that I teach and make videos about, where I do feel like, on like, especially the Linux, attacking Linux devices,
Right.
I feel
This
like
was an easy one.
that's my jam. That's what I'm really good at. But with this RF stuff, it's brand new and I'm learning a bunch of stuff. And I just like to be open with people about that. But making the video pushes me to be like, okay, I gotta figure this out, or there's not gonna be a next video in the series sometimes. So after the first video, I was trying to do this replay attack, and it wasn't working. And so actually yesterday, I was kind of like, okay, I need to get this to work. I need to get this to work. And yeah, maybe it's the dopamine hit, the just of figuring things out, and figuring out how stuff works, that I really drives me to get stuff
Yeah,
done.
that's great. That's great. No, I think it's paying off, man. Like it's I feel like and then like that almost like that social contract of like you're saying you're gonna do this thing and then like wanting to deliver on it. It's like I think then it's people listening might be like, all right, I guess I got to start a YouTube channel too. So oh
It's interesting. So I just came back from the Hardware IO conference, and people that
yeah,
like
how was that?
speak and present at conferences, there's this one person that said like, yeah, like I really wanted to do this thing, and so I submitted a talk that like,
Ah, yeah,
and then that maybe they hadn't like, done all the pre-work yet to make sure that this thing would work, and then that like forced themselves, right? You're right, it's the social contract, it's like the commitment to something helps you to stay focused and accomplish it sometimes.
yeah. I mean, they only ask for abstracts. They don't ask for any proof that it works, right?
Exactly.
I may have submitted abstracts to things that didn't work yet.
Yeah.
And then there's always that subtle move, it's like where it literally didn't work, and then it's lessons learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Need to change the title just slightly.
Yeah.
How was hardware? How was that conference? Is it worth going to?
It's kind of become my favorite conference, and that's just because
Well, yeah.
I do go to DEF CON. I'm going to go to DEF CON this year. DEF CON is the big conference in Las Vegas, and there's just lots of people, and it's a very wide breadth of interests that are at DEF CON, right? The cybersecurity space is so big and so vast. But Hardware IO is cool because in the hardware security world, it's a really small world. It's like everybody knows each other. It's a very tight knit community. They all chat and talk to each other. It's
I try and get them on the podcast.
right, right. And
Yeah.
so it was just a really cool to be among people that share the same passions and stuff like that. It was just a
Yeah.
lot more focused. And I would draw the analogy to that whole conference. It's like going at DEF CON to the villages. At DEF CON, there are these villages which are kind of topic focused areas, right? There's the IoT village, there's the hardware hacking village, there's the social engineering village, right? There's a vast array of things to do focused around a specific interest or skill set or you know, kind of subcategory within the cybersecurity world. And hardware IO, it's just all the hardware security people in one place for, you know, 3 days of training and 2 days of a conference, and it was a blast.
It's been a couple years now since I've been back to DEF CON, and just thinking about it now, I'm just like, one, the heat, and I'm like, oh god. And then, but then, like, yeah, just the crowds and the people, and it's like, it's so much fun, but it's its own thing, you know, it's its own thing.
It is,
So
yeah.
where would people, maybe this is a good way to end, where should people find you both at DEF CON this year if they were looking to find you, and you know, and say hi and tell them how much you like your videos, and then also online, how can people find you?
Yeah, so at DEF CON, I will actually be doing a demo in the Embedded Systems Village. And so we're going to be doing some eMMC chip off and
Oh
firmware modification, and then doing BGA reballing. Again, this is
yeah,
one of these things where you commit to it ahead of time. We're like, okay, I really got to do this in front of people. We're going to be doing BGA reballing live,
nice.
a
Yeah,
live
that's great.
demo. Nothing could go
Yeah.
wrong. But that's where you
No,
can
I
find
mean,
me, at the Embedded Systems Village at DEF CON, and online. My YouTube channel is you just type Matt Brown into YouTube, and I'm the first one there. I'm not the UFC fighter, Matt Brown, but the other guy.
yeah. Okay, yeah. He hacks on other stuff.
Yeah,
He hacks on
exactly.
people's
Yeah.
chins and their shoulder bones and their, yeah, yeah. And then you have a new IoT security newsletter that you're also
Yeah.
starting up.
Yeah. So I'm starting. I'm gonna be shooting out the first post soon of my newsletter, the IoT Security Digest, and this is just going to be a place where I share my unique take on IoT security news, educational resources, tools in the open source community, and
Yeah.
just kind of in that spirit of sharing. So love
Yes.
for
I
people to check that
I am
out.
signed up because I want to know when something pops up in this industry that I need to know about. It's just like, oh, that's new. Yeah, okay. Watch out.
Well, thank you.
Matt, thank you for being here, and thanks for your great videos. I always look forward to your next one. So please keep up the good work, and yeah, I'll come back anytime.
Thanks for having me.